Reprenons la séance.
We have now reconvened. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 29th, 2024, the committee resumes its study of the experiences of Indigenous and Black veterans. Before we begin, seeing as we've just come back from a non-sitting week where we've been in our ridings, I would call upon members to be very, very careful to not cause any interference. Try to protect your interpreter's ears. Make sure you don't wave around your listening device. We want to avoid any problems for our interpreters, and you do have a QR code on the card with instructions. Now we have witnesses with us today, and to welcome our witnesses for the first part.
First, we have with us Ami Meunier, Assistant Deputy Minister, Commemoration and Public Affairs Branch. Madame Nathalie Pham, Director General Field Operations, Service Delivery Branch by video conference. Welcome. Joel Peterson, Senior Operations Manager, Indigenous Veteran Engagement Team by video conference from Winnipeg. Et je vous souhaite donc la plus cordiale bienvenue.
I'd like to wish you a very warm welcome to all our witnesses, and I believe we will begin with Madame Meunier for her opening statement. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours, Madame Meunier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for having us here today to speak about the experiences of Indigenous and Black veterans. In the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Ottawa is built on the unceded Anishinaabe-Algonquin territory, and that the peoples of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin Nation have lived here for millennia. When it comes to military experience, Mr. Chair, we know that Indigenous people and Black Canadians have historically faced significant discrimination, notably in the form of overt exclusion and systemic racism. From discriminatory enlistment policies to forced assimilation, the treatment endured by Indigenous people and Black Canadians is a stain on our history. We've worked hard to address this regrettable legacy, both by recognizing the generational impact of the wrongs committed and by taking action to eliminate any barriers that have kept Indigenous people and Black Canadians from receiving the care and support they are entitled to as veterans. We've made some progress, but there's still much more work to do. The Minister's mandate letter contains several commitments designed to achieve results for equity-deserving veterans. Specific to those who are Indigenous, We are working to reduce barriers to accessing services, including improving outreach to Indigenous communities and expanding the offering of culturally appropriate services, which our department has been doing through our Indigenous Veterans Engagement Team. In its first year, VAC's Indigenous Veterans Engagement Team conducted over 80 in-person engagements with Indigenous communities and veterans. This included participation in 5 trade shows, conferences, and annual meetings, as well as presentations to CAF leadership, Canadian Rangers, Indigenous Leadership Opportunity Year participants, and the RCMP. The team also made more than 40 community visits, attended 6 festivals and powwows, and took part in 2 international events. Notably, they supported a delegation of families and community members who traveled to the Netherlands to commemorate Indigenous soldiers at their graves through the Indigenous Legacy Project. Veterans Affairs Canada has been working to improve Indigenous veterans' access to and culturally appropriate services. We're working with other government organizations to create a process that ensures Indigenous veterans can smoothly connect with programs such as traditional healing and elder services. This approach respects the vital role of Indigenous communities in identifying and delivering culturally specific supports. We've also listened closely to Indigenous leaders and community members, including the Southern Chiefs, who have shared their perspectives on improving these services. Through ongoing dialogue, VAC continues to adapt and refine this process based on feedback, ensuring that the services align with the unique needs and cultural perspectives of Indigenous veterans. Our department signed a letter of understanding with the Assembly of First Nations in April of 2023 that highlights joint priorities in veteran engagement, outreach, and commemoration. In 2019, we signed a Métis Veterans Recognition Payment Contribution Agreement to address concerns raised by the Métis Nation with regard to the treatment of Second World War Métis veterans. Nous nous engageons aussi à
We're also committed to recognizing the military service of Indigenous peoples and Black Canadians, as well as their achievements in the Canadian Armed Forces.
The Commemorative Partnership Program has approved a total of more than $865,000 in funding for 80 projects in Indigenous communities, or projects commemorating the contribution of Indigenous veterans. You may know as well about the particular focus our department has placed on telling the story of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. With funding from our Community Partnership Program, organizations are encouraged to plan commemorative activities, develop educational materials, build or improve community war memorials that commemorate the battalion, its members, and its legacy. This dedicated funding responds to a recommendation from the National Apology Advisory Committee, which conducted consultations with descendants of the No. 2 Construction Battalion and members of Black communities on their vision of a meaningful apology. Following the first call for proposals last February, 15 organizations received funding for 16 projects that honor the legacy of the No. 2 Battalion. Interactive websites, educational events, new memorials, and learning exhibits. Des expositions, des plaques, et des
Exhibitions, plaques, and commemorative ceremonies, all unique ways to commemorate these people who did so much to mark Canada's military history through their courage, their sacrifice, and their determination to serve despite the obstacles they faced.
Veterans through our Veteran and Family Wellbeing Fund, which provides grants and contributions to private, public, academic, or Indigenous organizations to conduct research and implement initiatives and projects that support the well-being of veterans and their families. Monsieur le Président, bien conscient
Mr. Chair, although Veterans Affairs is taking steps to ensure that Indigenous and Black veterans receive the support and services they need and deserve, we recognize that there is still much to be done. And that's why we look forward to this committee's recommendations on how we can improve the experience of these veterans. Thank you.
Je vous remercie beaucoup.
I would like to thank you very much, Ms. Meunier, for your opening remarks. And now I'd like to address members of the committee. We have a small part in camera. Now, I would propose 45 minutes rather than the 1 hour we'd set scheduled for the second hour. But with the witnesses from the department, I would propose that each party has 6 minutes. You can share your 6 minutes so that we have the time for our subsequent witnesses.
Excellent. Et je vous rappelle aussi,
I'd also like to remind you that Ms. Meunier is not alone. We have two witnesses online. You can address your questions to all three.
Blake, yeah? I start with Mr. Richards, the first Vice President of the committee, for 6 minutes. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to start by giving notice of the following motion. Given that during a recent Remembrance Day ceremony at Sir Robert Borden High School, the school played an anti-Israel protest song associated with the ongoing war in Gaza, instead of playing music associated with the service and sacrifice of Canadian service members. The principal of the school defended the choice, complaining that Remembrance Day is too often about, and I quote, a white guy who has done something related to the military. And that the committee report to the House its opinion that the principal of Sir Robert Borden High School should be terminated for his actions. Obviously a disgraceful situation which dishonors the memory and sacrifice of many of our Canadian soldiers, and one that I just want to put on notice today. Now I'll turn to some questions I have. I wanted to start with the following. And I'd like to know if Indigenous veterans who utilize other programs such as the On Reserve Income Assistance Program have their benefits or entitlements from VAC affected by that. For example, would these Indigenous specific programs be counted against income tested benefits, such as the income replacement benefit from VAC, therefore meaning that Indigenous veterans would be have their incomes and benefits reduced as a result of their heritage? Can you tell me if that in fact occurs?
Very much for that question. The income replacement benefit, it is intended as the name to replace income, and then there are certain types of payments that would be offset from that if they're deemed income. I can't say offhand if that is one specifically. Okay. I can ask my colleague.
If there's someone that can answer, otherwise if you could just commit to providing the
sure.
answer.
Yep.
Is there someone that can answer that?
I'll look to my colleague, Ms. Pham.
Excuse me, Mrs. Pham, your mic.
Just a quick
please turn it on
that,
or microphone.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. Donc, comme Madame Meunier.
As Ms. Meunier just said, the income replacement's purpose is to replace the income.
Use it this way, please. I'd like to just have an answer. Is the income replacement benefit, for example, is it reduced if an Indigenous, and I'd like just a yes or no answer, if they receive other assistance?
I believe that each case is unique. If you'll agree, we'll get back to you.
To us, that would be very helpful. Obviously, it would be completely wrong if it turns out to be the case that an Indigenous veteran is being penalized in their earnings due to their heritage. So I hope that the answer is no, but please provide that to us. Now, I'd like to ask, there's studies that have been done by organizations like the Atlas Institute that show that Indigenous veterans have the lowest satisfaction rate with Veterans Affairs around the services they receive. Can you tell us why that is?
I can tell you that we're working very diligently to try and make stronger connections with Indigenous veterans, their families, and in particular with Indigenous communities. For a long time, as I mentioned in my opening remarks.
So sorry, in those communications that you're having, what is the indication you're receiving as to why those satisfaction rates are so low?
Information that we've been hearing and feedback we've been hearing is, in some instances, individuals did not recognize they were veterans themselves, so therefore were not coming forward to seek support. That perhaps government hadn't treated them well in the past, and so there's hesitancy or reticence in order to engage. So we've been very focused on creating trust with communities and Indigenous veterans.
Sorry to interrupt because the time is limited. Would you say that the low engagement that you've seen and the low satisfaction is a reflection that the department's policies are inadequate?
No, not at all. I would not say that.
No?
In fact,
Okay.
over the last
So you're
number of
suggesting that these Indigenous veterans are
Point
incorrect
of order,
in
Mr. Chair.
having a low
Excuse
rating
me,
of VAC
excuse me,
programs?
excuse me, Mr. Richards, I have a point
I'm
of order.
I understand Mr. Richards has time and he can choose to use that time, but we're missing critical content here in these questions. There's not a question that's been asked where Mr. Richards has not interrupted the witnesses, and I just
Yeah.
think we're doing a disservice to our witnesses
Well, no,
by
I
not
stopped the
actually
time.
listening
Yeah.
to the answers.
I understand that. I know that, listen, I know that I said 6 minutes each group, but at the same time, we have a decorum, we have question and answers, and I used to say, if you have a question during 1 minute, so you can allow about a minute to the witnesses, to the witness to reply. So please, and last thing, we have our interpreters there, so if we have it like that and chaos, so it will be tough for them. Please, thank you.
So with that, Chair, hearing that you believe that it's not the case that your programs are inadequate, are you saying that you believe that these Indigenous veterans are incorrect in having this low assessment of VAC?
No, I'm not saying they're incorrect. What I'm saying is that it's our responsibility to make sure Indigenous veterans and their communities and families are well aware of the programs so that they can avail themselves of it, that we can make sure when there's an Indigenous veteran or service person in need that they know who to reach out to quickly. And it can be anybody at Veterans Affairs Canada. It can be someone within their community, which is why we're trying to build partnerships at the individual level, but also at a community level.
Okay. But you're of the position that the programs themselves are adequate. You just need to do more to communicate the programs. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that the programs are very effective, but if people are not participating in them or are aware of them, then they can't benefit from them. In my opening remarks, I also made mention of greater access to traditional and cultural healing, which has been a priority for the department based on feedback from
So I'll just point out,
Indigenous
Chair,
veterans, of course.
that we had actually asked that the officials come at the end of this study to respond to what we've heard from veterans. That has not been, in fact, what's occurred here. And I would just simply indicate that I certainly hope that you're going to be listening to the study, because I think what we've heard in the little bit we've heard so far is that is not the case, that I don't think that Indigenous veterans feel that they're being served appropriately. And that I hope that you will be paying close attention to this study, and that I hope you'll make yourselves available to answer to the inadequacies that we may hear from veterans as we go forward in this study. And again, I would just ask that you please provide the information about whether any of VAC's benefits are income tested against other programs that Indigenous veterans may receive through their Indigenous heritage. And I would certainly indicate that it is absolutely inappropriate if veterans of Indigenous heritage are having their benefits from VAC or other income reduced as a result of their heritage. That is completely inappropriate. And you've talked a lot about historic wrongs. There are current wrongs that are happening, and I certainly hope your government is paying attention to those too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richards. So now, before I go to another members, you can see that I let you ask questions and answers, but we all know that all questions and answers should be addressed through the chair. But if I have to do it, I will be strict about that. But I let you go, guys. And now let's go to Mr. Miao for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here and online today. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to address my first question to Ms. Menear. What steps is VAC taking to ensure the contributions of Indigenous and Black veterans are properly recognized in Canadian military history and public commemoration?
Thank you very much for that question. As we know, recognition is a key component to veterans' well-being and can come in many forms, benefits and services, but also honoring and recognizing and storytelling. With regard to Indigenous veterans, for example, or diverse veterans, we're expanding that recognition. So we certainly are putting together, if you look on our website, there are dedicated pages telling the true history of what occurred with underrepresented groups. We've also built over the last number of years quite a few educational packages specifically relating to Black veterans, women veterans, 2S LGBTQI plus veterans, as well as other marginalized groups. We also have our community partnership program, which in 2021, the terms and conditions were changed to increase the eligible amount for projects that focus on commemorating or recognizing Indigenous veterans. We're quite pleased with the significant take-up, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, a significant amount of money has gone into communities to really tell that story. As well, on behalf of the Department of National Defense, we also have a dedicated stream of programming that focuses on Black veterans with an emphasis on the No. 2 Construction Battalion, but also for other Black veterans, again, to make sure that we're telling the story of their fantastic service, and perhaps they weren't as prevalent or as easy to find in the past. And so that is a big effort on our part to make sure that that information is readily available.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to go online to Mr. Pedersen, and this is related to a recent witness at this committee who were very complimentary of the work of FACT's Aboriginal liaison officers. The witness says, and I quote, "I wouldn't have been able to access more of some of the programs that are available if it wasn't for these liaison officers." And that's a testament to the work you and your engagement team has done and is currently doing. Could you share some insights with our committee about this team and its composition and the impacts that you have seen through this work?
Oui, merci. Bonjour.
Thank you very much. And
Absolute pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you for the kind words, sir. And Mr. Chair, with regards to the questions asked so far, I'd like to also just indicate, like we've got a lot of space to cover and a lot of people to meet with, and we're doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Our team is comprised right now of three persons. Well, the first one is in Victoria, and she has been with Veterans Affairs for a number of years and knows the ins and outs really well. The second member is from Edmonton, and he's a former Canadian Armed Forces member as well, and has been working with Veterans Affairs Canada for a number of years. The remainder of our team works out in PEI and assists us quite a lot with the administrative portion. What we've seen over the last year and a half is a lot of engagement. And as Madame Mueller mentioned, we've been able to meet with Canadian Armed Forces and RCMP current serving members and retired members. And the majority of Indigenous members that we have been able to work with, we've been able to facilitate and assist them with their questions and also assist them with their files. We're finding a lot of the engagement with leadership, both at the First Nation, Métis, and Innu communities has been really significant. And we look forward to continuing these meaningful engagements. I'd like to also just add, Mr. President, that when we're talking about TRC and UNDRIP, we really are doing some heavy lifting here. And I think if there's anything that's moving, that's what we're doing. And we're really honored to be a part of this. Questions to anyone, please.
And to follow up with that, has the work of the engagement team helped identify any gaps or issues that could help and then be relayed to other parts of the department so that they could be looked at or hopefully resolved in the future?
We may see. Great question. So yeah, we work often with the area office. I actually just got off before this meeting started with the area office in Winnipeg, Southern Chiefs Organization, which looks after close to 34 First Nations in Manitoba. And just connecting and liaisoning with them provides them the capacity to meet with the community's needs. And I feel like we're really augmenting onto what a lot of the area offices are doing, but we're also providing some professional development and some real insight as to how do we network with the Indigenous communities in a meaningful way.
Thank you. And does the engagement team also travel to remote communities to engage directly with Indigenous veterans? And if it is, can you talk about the value of those experiences?
Oui, merci. So Leanne Lavoie is out of Vancouver, and she does the majority of the very far north. She's been to all of the far north communities, meeting with the ranger patrols, ranger patrol leadership, and with the RCMP detachments. David and I kind of crisscross across the country, and all three of us have facilitated with commemoration events, with the last being one for the 50th, 60th in Cyprus.
Thank you, Mr. Miao. Et maintenant, nous allons passer la.
And now, we'd like to give the floor to our second Deputy Chair, Luc Desilets. Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to our three witnesses and for sharing your knowledge with us. I have a question for Ms. Fan. So you are Director General of Regional Operations for all of Canada. Now, do you have many Indigenous and Black persons working as case managers? Yes, we do have a proportionate number of Indigenous and Black staff members. Could you tell us what the percentage would be? I do not have that information at my fingertips. Of course, you also realize staff is constantly changing, but there is a percentage. Could you please forward that data to us? It would be relevant for us to know. Now, if a case manager is to work with an Indigenous or Black veteran, or one who is not Black or Indigenous, do they have the specific training to be able to manage the case file? Yes, our managers work with veterans, be it a Black or Indigenous or any other veteran with any specific problem. They receive the necessary training to do their job. So I will give you an example. In Nova Scotia, our case managers have created a relationship with the Association of Black Case Managers of Nova Scotia. They've done training on trauma with members of the Black community, and soon they will be getting a training with the Indigenous community to better understand those issues. So those are tailored training sessions to help our case managers develop their skills. Now, we don't know the percentage, but do we have a sufficient number of case managers who are able to work with these groups? Case management is a specialization, and you asked if we have a sufficient number of Indigenous or Black case managers. I can tell you can always benefit from having more. However, if we do have a veteran who is specifically seeking an Indigenous or a Black case manager, it is possible for us to assign them the proper case manager. Now, when you post for these jobs, are there specific criteria? Indigenous, Black, for instance, is what you're looking for? Yes, we do targeted job postings, and of course, we respect equity, but we are specifically looking for these case managers. A few weeks ago, we had a witness testify, and it was quite troubling. We heard that it took some 5 applications before getting accepted, and over a number of years. Now, does this happen often? In cases where there are numerous requests put in, I couldn't tell you because I don't have the tools at hand. But it could be that we are looking for specific information. I'll give you an example, and you tell me if this is something you've ever come across before. This veteran's military file could not even be found. Now, is that something that happens often? Could not even find this veteran's file. Well, if you're telling me that the file didn't exist, we are working closely with National Defence to ensure that when veterans leave, their files are complete and made accessible. But that is National Defence who could better answer your question. As to Veterans Affairs, we will do the searches. We'll work with the veteran. Thank you very much. And a report was tabled in 2019 dealing with Indigenous, and there was a recommendation 12. And it was that Veterans Affairs Canada review the eligibility criteria of its programs that provide funding for war memorials so that remote communities wanting to honor their memory be better able to do so. Was that recommendation implemented? Yes, absolutely. And as I said earlier, in 2021, we changed our program.
There was dedicated funds for Indigenous communities. We increased the amount that they would be eligible for. And as I mentioned, a significant number of Indigenous communities.
It's a community's choice.
Ceremony, a cenotaph, c'est le choix. C'est un choix.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Desilets.
Ms. Blenny for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I want to thank Ms. Pham, Ms. Mounier, and Mr. Peterson for being here with us today. I will ask questions, and whoever's the best person to answer those questions, I'm happy to hear from. So we did have some testimony not long ago from the Veterans Association Food Bank that talked about some very concerning language that was extremely racist, where we heard from Ms. Blackburn that she heard from workers at VAC that they didn't want to give money directly to Indigenous veterans because they were worried that they would drink it up. And I found that really concerning. And what I want to understand better is what is the capacity of organizations that are working to support veterans to bring forward a complaint. We heard very clearly, and I think this is a huge concern, that Indigenous veterans, and I would say that probably veterans from the Black community and the people of color veterans, often feel afraid to come forward because they think they're going to lose their benefits by voicing what they see happening to themselves. And service providers often don't have the ability to advocate without a name that they are putting forward. So I'm just wondering if there's any look, what is the process of bringing forward these kind of complaints? How can service providers be able to bring forward those complaints without naming a veteran to protect that veteran? And how do we make sure that something like this doesn't happen again? And I want to be really clear, I believe her 100%. I've heard this so many times. It's a very unfortunate stereotype, but it resides in Canadians and not every person. but it doesn't matter because every time a veteran asks for services and told that they can't access them because of assumption about who they are, we're really losing those supports. So I'm just wondering if if the committee could learn a little bit more about that process and what that might look like.
I'll start by saying I'm saddened to hear that, and of course, when I heard the testimony, that's not a response that's acceptable for our department, and so we certainly would not condone that kind of stereotyping. There's a number of ways for any individual, but in this case, a service provider, to elevate without necessarily identifying. Contacting, if you're a service provider with the department, there are escalation channels that come as part and parcel of being a service provider with the department or Medavie Blue Cross. There's also going directly into the department through through the National Client Contact Network, or if they happen to know an individual. We also have area offices in many locations across the country that have relationships with those organizations, so potentially a direct linkage there. I do understand the context that might not be the most effective route based on what you're suggesting. There's also the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman, and while they're certainly in place to look at systemic issues, and that would be a place we work actively with that office. I might look to my colleague, Ms. Pham, to see if she has additional information from a service delivery perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Meunier. I would, like Ms. Meunier said, this is very unfortunate, and I'm saddened by what I hear. Is that in our offices we should not have stereotype, like you mentioned, and we should not be discriminating any of our veterans. So I would, I know it's hard, but encourage providers or veterans themselves to come forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sorry I've only got a couple minutes left. I hear that, but the frustrating part, of course, is that these systems are intrinsically built to make people who feel marginalized not feel included, not feel like they participate. So as much as I hear that, I think that there needs to be some serious work on how do we make those things work more effectively. So my next question is around anti-racism training. I'm curious about what is the level of anti-racism training, and actually I'm just going to ask if that can be just given to the committee. What level, what type of training, and for what positions? Because I think it's really important. Often only a few people are given that training, and if it's actually going to be meaningful, it has to be done at all levels. So my next question is, we know that there's not enough data around Indigenous and Black veterans. We know that that's also challenging on the service side as well. So I'm curious about what's happening around collecting that data so that there can be better analysis of where people are falling through gaps. And then the next part of that question is, we know that sometimes harm is done while serving in the military by the military. We've heard this very clearly from the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that they're actually harmed not necessarily from the actual action of service, but that the internal issues. I'm just wondering, that's not documented. So how does VAC actually respond to that, and can you?
I might start by indicating, as you know, in 2021, there was a veteran question on the census that gave us, started to give us more specific information. We know there are about 23,000 Indigenous veterans in Canada, about 11,000 Métis, about 11,000 First Nations, about 700 Innu, give or take. And then recently we had the Community Health Needs Assessment, which really targeted those marginalized or underrepresented voices. And I'm sure we could, someone much more intimate with those details could provide a solid briefing to the committee about what that tells us. So that information will really help us drill down into areas of where there may be barriers we're not seeing through conversation and engagement. So it'll be a little more precise in that regard. In terms of discrimination or poor treatment that somebody may have experienced in the military or in society, difficult to change what they've experienced, but we're certainly well aware, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that when individuals who have been marginalized come to us. Our staff, in particular those frontline staff, are working on being trained to be culturally sensitive, making sure that we're adapting the training. As you indicated, there is quite a fair bit of discrimination and racism prevention training that happens in the department at all levels, with a great emphasis on our frontline staff. So we could certainly provide that to you in writing as you requested.
Thank you,
sorry.
thank you, thank you, Mrs. Meunier. C'est tout le temps.
That is all the time we have.
Mr. Colmy.
My colleague, Mr. Desolé, came up with a very good question earlier on with regards to how many Black and Indigenous employees, Veterans Affairs employees, and the reply was proportionate. And I'm wondering if the department could actually respond in writing if the proportionate numbers are those of who have served or those who are within our population numbers. I think we would appreciate it for the
Absolutely, and I'm just fiddling here and couldn't find it, but we
Yes.
can send that to you quite quickly. My
Thank
apologies.
you, thank you. We know that Mrs. Meunier, she's used to come to our committee, so do not hesitate to send it to the clerk and we'll share it with members. So, au nom des membres du comité et au nom
On behalf of the members of the committee and my own behalf, I'd like to thank you, witnesses, for having come. We have had with us several witnesses. Amy Meunier from the Commemorative and Public Affairs Branch, Natalie Pham from the Regional Operations, Service Delivery, and Joelle Peterson, Chief Operating Officer, Aboriginal Veterans Engagement Team. Now we're going to take a very short break to get ready to welcome our next witnesses.
Voilà, nous
We are now going to reconvene, and we're dealing with the study on the experience of Indigenous and Black veterans. And during this second panel, we have two groups.
First of all, from Aboriginal Veterans Autochthone, we have Randy Gaig, Manitoba Chapter Chair of United Veterans of Manitoba, Wendy Ann Joko, Indigenous Liaison, Innovation 7, by video conference. She was there at the first hour with us. And from the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, Nicolas Held, Assistant Scientific Director, and Paul Hook, Major, Retired Managing Director. So welcome to our meeting, and each group will have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and after that will be some questions from the members. So I'd like to start with the Aboriginal Veteran Autochthone. We have with us Mrs. Randy Gaig, so you have 5 minutes for opening remarks, please.
Well, I'm claiming 6 because I want to say something that I want you to listen to very carefully.
Right.
BIOPOC, stop using it. The community does not want that used. It's separated, it's just stop. Moving on.
Could you repeat again, please?
Could I do it again?
Yeah.
BIOPOC. Black, Indigenous people of color. Stop using that terminology. The communities do not want it. It separates us. It's divisive. It is another way in which the government can say, oh, we've already done that for them. Well, we're not all them. I'm Indigenous. I'm also Black. Huh? That's another story. It's very divisive, so just stop. Now, you ready for the other part? Bonjour. Megasekwe Indigenous Kas. Nagichita kwe mong dodum. I bring greetings to this gathering located on the traditional unceded territories, unsurrendered territories of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin peoples from Treaty 1 territories, located on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, the Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene, Cree, Inuit nations, and the homeland of the Red River Métis from Manitoba. With respect to the spirit and intent of the treaties and the treaty-making process, I remain committed to working in partnership with the new arrivals to our lands in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. The topics I chose to speak to you about today are the physical health, the mental health, some safety concerns, and the sexual trauma during service. Female health is the top of the list. Lack of proper accommodations for personal needs. It is painfully evident that those in command are not understanding the personal needs of their female soldiers. During field operations, not being allowed for a simple blanket or to shield a female soldier to use the toilet is unseen as a time of disrespect, harassment, and the female requesting such is usually tormented and picked on. Lack of understanding of the extended wear of a personal hygiene product and how dangerous that actually is. Further to the lack of accommodations is the lack of understanding of the dangers to the female soldier faces when not allowed to change her personal hygiene product. Prolonged wear of such items can result in toxic shock, which is clearly stated on the Tampax box itself that gives the instructions that don't wear this longer than 8 hours. I've had several female soldiers who have been deployed into the rural areas or into active combat areas that have had their locals come to them scared because they noticed the stain on their pants and think they've been hit by a bullet or the ricochet or something. So this is something that needs to be addressed. It needs to be looked at, and the harassment that women go through during that time of the month should not be happening. The lack of recognition of the health needs of the mature forces female is clearly documented. Around the time of menopause, many females experience physical symptoms such as hot flashes, night sweats, you know, the normal things that we all have to go through, and it's nothing you can do about it. However, the impact on the person's quality of life and the range of the stuff becomes very severe. It can be from mild to severe. It starts like in the 30s, and it's inevitable to happen. Now, not to let you guys off easy, but you also go through something, and it's not being recognized either. It's called andropause, or you might know it as the little red convertible syndrome. These are real things that happen to your body, and Canadian Forces does not recognize that in the men or the women, but the women have a worse time of it because, you know, we have to do things that you don't have to do. So doing something so simple as a bucket in the corner with a blanket to have a little bit of respect would go a long way to help the ladies. And these things impact on the mental health as well. Now, I'm going to say something here that may rankle a couple of feathers, but you know what? I don't care. Having presentations from misogynistic, racist, and divisive civilians and veterans causes great confusion to this committee and to the government at large. First of all, I am not going to tell you the name, but if you ask me a specific name, I will say yes or no to it. When the committee or any of the committees, as people are questioning reputations and are presenting that do not represent Indigenous soldiers or Indigenous veterans, there's a ripple effect that goes out into the community. And it's a very, very hurtful, yes, I see your sign. It's a very hurtful thing, and that's not going to work. So it's something that you need to think about and know who you're asking questions from. Harassment, racism, hazing, general mental health and abuse. I'll send you some of that stuff because I've got with me 2 documents here of people that have lived through it. The lack of acknowledgement and understanding of access to the supports that various Indigenous peoples need for traditional ceremonies and things like that, not allowing us to go to a ceremony or saying you can't use that because you have to have a piece of paper that says you're from Queen's University or McGill University or whatever. I got news for you. Our elders, our people who actually know these things, know the herbs. They know what happened. And I've got 2 legs that I'm walking around on today because I said no to mainstream medicine and went to an herbalist, and I'm alive. Let me see. You wanted me to hurry up and go. Well, safety concerns, there's a whole raft of things here. Sexual trauma. I think I'll just send this to you and scare you with it because that way it gives me more time to expand on it. But in closing, this document here has got recommendations. This was presented here 32 years ago by me. Of these recommendations, number 1's the only one that's been addressed. This was reported in 32 years ago, 27 years ago, 12 years ago, and 7 years ago. Okay, guys, let's get busy.
Oh, well,
okay, I'm
thank
brave.
you.
Go for it.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Randy Gage. And, well, colleagues, I know that the clerk told me that each witness would like to say a few words, and I know that one of our colleagues would like to leave around 5:30, 45 maybe. So I'm going to let them share maybe for 5 minutes. So, but now I'm going to ask Mrs. Wendy Ann Joko from Indigenous Liaison, because this is a different organization, Innovation 7, to have a few minutes for your opening statement. Please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, but I would actually like to rectify my title page because I also I sit on the Assembly of First Nation Veterans Council, and I'm the interim vice president for Aboriginal Veterans Occupations. When I filled in the sheet, that's the company I work for. It's got nothing to do with veterans, although the owner of the company is indeed a veteran. So just want to thank the committee for inviting me here today to share a few things. I have written down 10 points which I would like to share with you. So just to let you know, and you probably already know, Indigenous veterans have played a crucial role in Canada's military history, serving with distinction in various conflicts. However, they have faced and continue to face unique challenges that require attention and action. So I have a brief overview to highlight these issues for presentation to your committee. Number one, historical context and recognition. Indigenous people have participated in every major battle and peacekeeping mission involving Canada, from the War of 1812 to modern day operations. And despite their significant contributions, these veterans have often been overlooked in historical narratives and official recognition. Lack of formal acknowledgement. As we know, for many years, the contributions of Indigenous veterans were not adequately recognized in official histories or commemorations. And this could be down to a few reasons. I did hear somebody earlier say, the word Indigenous, and it does include First Nation, Inuit, and Métis, but we also forget about the status and the non-status First Nation people. Many Indigenous people were enfranchised when they joined the Army, and unfortunately, there still are many people who are trying to find their way home and gain their status. So there's been delayed access to benefits. Many Indigenous veterans were initially denied access to the same best benefits and supportive services offered to non-Indigenous veterans upon their return from service, which of course had a collateral effect on their families and to this very day as well. Point number two, cultural and social challenges. Indigenous veterans have faced unique cultural and social challenges both during and after their military service. There's a cultural disconnect. Military service often requires Indigenous soldiers to leave their communities, leading to disconnecting from their cultural practices and languages. Many Indigenous veterans experience discrimination both within the military and upon their return to civilian life, and this still holds true today, as we've heard. The transition back to civilian life has been particularly challenging for Indigenous veterans, especially those returning to remote or isolated communities. Point number three, health and wellness issues. Indigenous face specific health and wellness challenges that require targeted support and intervention. Indigenous veterans may experience PTSD at a higher rate due to the compounded effects of military trauma and historical trauma related to colonization. Many Indigenous veterans struggle to access healthcare services that are both culturally sensitive and equipped to address their unique needs. Higher rates of substance abuse has been reported among Indigenous veterans, often linked to PTSD and difficulties in reintegration. Point number four, economic and employment challenges. Indigenous veterans often face significant economic and employment challenges upon return to civilian life. Many Indigenous veterans return to communities with limited economic opportunities, making it difficult to secure stable employment. There can be challenges in translating military skills to civilian job markets, particularly in Indigenous communities. Some Indigenous veterans may lack access to education and training programs that could help them transition to civilian careers. Point number five, housing and infrastructure issues. Adequate housing and infrastructure remain significant concerns for many Indigenous veterans. Indigenous veterans are at a higher risk of homelessness compared to the general veteran population. Many Indigenous veterans return to communities with inadequate housing conditions. Remote and isolated communities often lack the necessary support services for veterans. Point number six, intergenerational impact. The challenges faced by Indigenous veterans often have far-reaching effects on their families and communities. The effects of military service related to trauma can be passed down to subsequent generations. Extended periods of service and difficulties in reintegration can lead to family breakdowns and social issues within communities. Point number seven, ongoing efforts, and future direction. While progress has been made in addressing these issues, there is still much work to be done. Policy reforms. Continued efforts are needed to reform policies to better address the unique needs of Indigenous veterans. Increasing cultural competency within veteran support service is crucial for providing effective assistance. Developing and supporting community-based programs that integrate traditional healing practices with modern support services. Most comprehensive research and data collection are needed to fully understand and address the challenges faced by Indigenous veterans. Point number 8, sexual trauma and challenges faced by Indigenous soldiers. Indigenous soldiers, both male and female, have faced significant challenges during their military service, including experiences of sexual trauma and difficulties related to participation in foreign missions. These issues are compounded by historical trauma and ongoing systemic barriers. Indigenous soldiers have reported higher rates of sexual trauma compared to non-Indigenous counterparts, and they include sexual harassment and assault within military ranks, underreporting due to fear of reprisal or lack of culturally appropriate support, intersectional discrimination based on both Indigenous identity and gender. Point number 9, challenges in foreign missions. Indigenous soldiers may encounter unique difficulties when called to participate in foreign missions, cultural disconnection from traditional lands and practices, language barriers, especially those whose first language is Indigenous, conflict between military duties and Indigenous values or beliefs, limited access to culturally appropriate mental health support during deployment. And point number 10, Veterans Affairs Canada programs and supports. VAC has developed some programs to address these needs of Indigenous veterans, including those who have experienced sexual trauma. Indigenous veterans, the aim is to recognize and commemorate Indigenous veterans. They've got cultural competency training for VAC staff to better serve Indigenous veterans. They've also got partnerships with Indigenous organizations to provide culturally appropriate mental health services. Dedicated support for survivors of sexual trauma in the military, including specialized counseling services. However, many Indigenous veterans report that these programs are often insufficient or difficult to access, particularly in remote communities. There is an ongoing need for more comprehensive, culturally informed support services that address the unique experiences of Indigenous soldiers. So it is crucial to approach these sensitive topics with respect and to prioritize the voices and experience of Indigenous veterans in developing and implementing support. Just want to let you know, I am a veteran myself of 23 years. I have had some positive experience with VAC, I must say. However, that's not to be said for some people, including my son, who unfortunately passed away last year when he was only 38 years old, and his story is not so good. Anyway, I can see your little one there. So in conclusion, addressing the unique challenges faced by Indigenous veterans requires a multifaceted approach that acknowledges historical injustices, respects cultural differences, and provides targeted support.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Joko. And we know, colleagues, we have the testimony of Mrs. Joko, so we're going to have it in both official languages, so you will have a copy of that as well. And now let's go to Canadian Institute for Military and Veterans Health Research, and I start with Mr. Nicolas Held, Assistant Scientific Director. Please, go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. I'll make this, we won't go through it all. I believe you have access to it. If not, you will have access. So good evening, Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you very much for having us here. My name is Nicolas Held. I'm the Assistant Scientific Director of the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research. The acronym I'll be using is CIMVER, just so you have that background. Before we begin, I'd like to take this time to acknowledge that CIMVER is situated on the territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, otherwise known as Kingston. We are grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. Our mission at CIMVER is to enhance the lives of Canadian military personnel, veterans, and their families by harnessing the national capacity for research. Since 2010, CIMVER has built a network of 46 Canadian universities who have agreed to work together to address the health research requirements of the Canadian military, veterans, and their families. This institute acts as a conduit between the academic community and research funding organizations. On behalf of funding organizations, CIMVER distributes requests for proposals for research to researchers through its network of universities and manages all the tasks from there through scientific peer review process to the completion of the projects. We also publish a peer-reviewed academic journal called the Journal of Military, Veteran, and Family Health. We conduct knowledge translation of the research that's out there, and we host an annual conference that sees of anywhere from 600 to 1,000 people every year across Canada. Our latest one was CIMVER Forum 2024, which recently took place in Winnipeg, Manitoba. CIMVER is committed to equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigenization. We fully acknowledge that there has been a gap on our end institutionally on researching the two respective populations we are discussing today. In the past few years, however, we have worked towards bridging this gap to ensure that we are leaving nobody behind in the discourse of military and veteran health research. To note, within our journal, we have mobilized important information on Indigenous and Black veterans, including a complete special edition of our journal completely dedicated to these groups. It was in 2022 titled The Many Faces of Diversity in Military Employment. I won't go through all the other papers that are part of this. That will be part of the note. Same thing with our annual forum. These Indigenous Black veterans are a topic of discussion, as well as other minorities, women in the military, for a lot of presentations that take place both in podium and poster presentations at our forum. And from there, I think I might pass it over to Mr. Hook beside us, and the rest of this we'll be able to either chat about or will be sent to you as well.
Please, go ahead, Mr. Hook.
Mr. Chair, bonjour. Je m'appelle
Good evening. My name is Paul Hook. I'm a veteran, having spent 25 years in the Canadian Army as an officer in the Armored Corps.
Managing Director at CIMVER and responsible for human resources, finance, outreach, strategic planning, and using my lived experience as a military dependent, fourth generation serving military, as a military officer, and now as a veteran, to work with my colleagues such as Nicholas Held to make sure that the research that is being put out has all the merits that are required. Over the past year, CIMVER, as part of its work to complete our strategic plan that takes us to 2030, has had some hard discussions, and as my colleague did discuss, there is a research gap, and as we know, we've looked at hiring an Indigenous advisor as well as a diversity advisor, which we should both have in January of 2025. And that will allow us, as we move forward with our research areas of focus, to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all of our military, veteran, and families populations when we do research. Just as a point for the discussion on our annual conference, we were very happy to have Randy, as well as other people from Manitoba, attend our conference. There was a specific push, especially being in Manitoba, with the Red River Métis and many of the organizations, such as the Southern Chiefs, to ensure that we had Indigenous veterans and Indigenous serving members at our conference, because we know and we understand that having groups, especially marginalized groups, that the Minister VAC herself brought up as a priority for research, having them at our conference just makes it that much more special. And we talked about how great it was and how ironic it was that, 6 weeks ago when I sent an email to Randy saying that she was more than welcome to come to our forum, that we would be on the same panel. And so part of that discussion that my colleague talked about was the research that happens. I'll just give an example of last year in our call for abstracts for new and emerging research. We spoke about well-being, sex, gender, EDI and intersectionality, service-related injury and illness, and mental health. And one of the streams that we had in 2023, because we know there's a gap in research in Canada, actually had 4 titles. So the research topics were racial disparity and female veteran homelessness, the lived experience of Black service women in the United States, and using cultural safety and competency as a lens to understand BIPOC CAF members' experiences utilizing health services. and the BIPOC was actually in the title, so I'm just using it there. And so we do know there's a gap, but there is research going on, and CIMVR is committed to ensuring that we do more, and we are working towards a potential targeted engagement grant through Department of National Defense to ensure that we can have that discussion with the Indigenous community for research with and by and for Indigenous military members, veterans, and their families. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hook. And now we're going to start a round of questions. But I know that members of the committee, at the beginning, we didn't know that we can have so much witnesses, so we have a limited study on that. And maybe that members of the committee will re-invite some of you, or because we have a lot to discuss, and to ask you also as witnesses to send us more information. But for now, I'd like to know from the members of the committee if we can have a tour of 6 minutes each, or and second thing, I'd like to ask members in how do we say that, cordiality. Mr. Desilets should leave at 5:30. Can we start with him? It's 6 minutes, and we come back with the regular tour. Is that okay?
It's the first round.
Ok, but il m'a dit en anglais seulement. Vous devez poser la question. Non, je m'excuse. Alors, mesdames, messieurs.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have Mr. Luc Desilets for the next 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Very kind of all of you. Ms. Gage, the document you referred to, the study that goes back some 35 years, would there be possibility of getting a copy of that? So for the clerk, please. Now, you were there at the time of the Vietnam War. Could you compare the treatment of U.S. Indigenous veterans, Black veterans compared to Indigenous veterans here in Canada?
That's a difficult one. That's not completely as bad, but quite bad. What happened here in Canada to Indigenous veterans, it's wrong on so many levels. Being Black in the United States and going into the military, down there when you put on the uniform, you're a soldier. And we don't turn and say, oh, are you black, white, green, purple, whatever. It's like, cover my behind. They went in and did their job like any other American soldier went in. I don't remember having faced too many issues the same as Indigenous soldiers up here faced. And when I came to Canada a long time ago, I had never faced the amount of racism and terror that I had down in the States that I did up here. So it's comparable, but not completely compatible with it.
Monsieur.
Mr. Hook, in your research on veterans' health, did you observe any marked differences between the health of Indigenous veterans and the health of non-Indigenous veterans?
Comme Monsieur Held a dit,
as Mr. Held said, we plan to do a lot of research in the future on intersectionality.
There's been research done, but never a view to looking at the difference between white serving members, Black serving members, Indigenous serving members, and we know there's a gap there. There's been maybe 1 or 2 researchers that have looked at that as a specific thing, and so we know that looking forward, that needs to be committed, and that's why within our research we have the SAGR guidelines, the sex and gender and race guidelines, to ensure that we're looking at those questions and that they're answered in the research.
Mais n'avez-vous pas fait une étude?
But did you not conduct a comparative study between different countries? I believe New Zealand was one of the countries, and it was about the treatment of veterans and the health of Indigenous versus non-Indigenous. Am I mistaken?
Refer to my colleague on the research side, as he's the expert on research.
Yeah, thank you. So the countries you're naming would make sense within the Five Eyes. New Zealand would be a part of that. So I'm not discrediting what your statement is. There's probably research on that. I think an important thing for us to note at CIMVR is we don't do internal research. We facilitate, mobilize, fund research. We work with researchers, but there wouldn't be any in-house research by CIMVR that worked on this. So I'm not exactly sure of the piece you're looking at. I will look into that, but I'm not exactly aware of the piece you're speaking to.
Monsieur, est-ce que c'était Grace Scopia that did the research? I know there are a few researchers at the Collège Militaire Royal du Canada qui ont fait de recherche avec.
They conducted some research in New Zealand and Australia. It could be. I could not tell you the exact source, but I do think that it could well be interesting. We work a lot internally. We identify the issues for Indigenous here at home, but there are Indigenous people elsewhere in the world, and comparative research could be interesting to just see what they are doing differently and what might be working better. But you yourselves do not have any studies in mind, any comparative country-to-country studies? No, but we have discussed this topic with our colleagues in Australia for 2025. Some international research, Australia, Canada, and England. With your discussions, are you under the impression that we're on the right path with the treatment of the particularity experienced by Indigenous veterans? Yes and no.
Start. Comme j'ai déjà dit, c'est mon deuxième an.
As I said, it's my second year at the Institute working with my colleagues. And so we are trying to bring about improvements in the research we're conducting with Indigenous and Black experts so that we conduct the right kind of research with those population groups. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. And now we'll come back to our first Deputy Chair, Blake Richards. Sorry, Fraser. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, anytime you want me to take over, you just let me know. I told you earlier. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. We're truly are grateful, and to those that have served, we are very, very grateful. And Ms. Jocko, I'm so touched and sorry to hear about the passing of your son, and obviously, you know, it's very, very close to home, and it's been very, very recent, and so I just want to let you know, thank you for sharing that with us and being open, and our heart goes out to you, and so. I have a couple questions that I'd like to kind of go through, and obviously this is a very important study to our committee. And obviously what we're looking for is the experiences of Indigenous and Blacks that have served within the Canadian military, and obviously to see from our committee standpoint how we can help them and make sure that we're ensuring that they're getting proper care and treatment. And so my first question, we'll go to Ms. Jocko, because you've been sitting there for quite a while during the previous testimony. what are your encounters with vets? I mean, you said that you've had an okay engagement, but then obviously you've heard other horror stories. Could you share a little bit about what you've experienced and from your perspective? And then I'd like to ask a couple questions to those that are present here.
Thank you very much. I say that I have had an okay experience with VAC. That's not to say that I've had an okay experience being in the military, you know, and my subsequent release. Any issue that I, you know, encountered when I made the application to VAC, I always went through the Legion headquarters in Ottawa. So I always had an advocate. And it seems to me that if you have an advocate, VAC seems to take your situation a little bit more seriously. I've had other veterans that I know of, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, that have, you know, tried to do things themselves and of course have come up, you know, to certain obstacles. Now, just to let you know, the downside of my experience came along with my son, who is an Indigenous man. He, you know, we reached out to Veterans Affairs for help for him for his, you know, mental health issues at the time, and absolutely zero help there, which is very unfortunate. And, you know, VAC knows his story, that's for sure. So when it came time for myself to get some support.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Do you think that if he would have had better service, that would have helped him? Is that something that's been part of it?
Yes, I do believe so, because the VAC agent or person that answers the phone when you actually reach out for help, you know, didn't really have a grasp of policies and procedures that were available for a situation like that. So we were basically swept under the carpet. And of course, you know, the eventuality was his death. Now then, I needed help myself. Now, this is where I didn't have a good experience, because I needed aftercare. You know, I needed, well, counseling and bereavement support. So I was put in touch, presumably, and I can't remember what program it was, with a peer. However, it was not a peer. It was a civilian woman who called me, not a veteran, not even a currently serving member of the forces. So to me, that was not a peer. On top of which, you know, and I do apologize, but she was not Indigenous. So, and I mean, when you're in a situation like that, you don't want to have to start at the point of contact and explain what happened to you, along the way. And she just had no clue about military service. She had no clue about an Indigenous person. So the point I'm trying to make, you know, even with the Assembly of First Nations and Aboriginal Veterans Autochthons, we have advocated for a peer support service, which would be Indigenous veterans, basically helping Indigenous veterans. And this was brought out Saskatchewan. It was called the Burns Way. You may have heard the horrible story of the James Smith Cree massacre, where veteran Earl Burns was killed, and there was a program called the Burns Way that was made in his honor, and it's an online application, 24 hours, puts you directly with an Indigenous veteran. And for me, I didn't even care if it was a male veteran who phoned me, but as long as it was a veteran and an Indigenous veteran. Because
so you were looking for someone that was someone that was going to be relatable to the experience and to your culture, and that was not provided. And that, I think that was one of the reasons why we asked the question in the first round, was how many Indigenous and how many Black employees are within Veterans Affairs, and you know how many have served. So I thank you very much. I really wish we had more time, and I am so sorry, but I wanted to reach out because you have been very, very gracious to be able to sit here and participate. I'm really afraid to ask Ms. Gage any questions. I have to ask a couple questions, though. Number one, you said that you moved to Canada, so you're not originally from Canada. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. When did you move to Canada?
Shame on you. That'll tell you how old I am.
Yeah. Well, hey, you don't know what else I'll ask later on.
I was an infant. I moved here 40 years ago, about 40 years ago.
Okay. All right. And so you've served in the U.S. military. Did you serve in the Canadian military?
No, I did not, but I have done a lot of work with the veterans over the expenditure of time. I'm actually the founder of Indigenous Veterans Day.
Right. So the question what I'm very interested to hear is what the difference in support for veterans in the U.S. and for Canada. Is there any way that you could share that information? I know Mr. Desilets was asking about New Zealand. And then I got one more question, but I think we're going to be out of time.
Okay. When you say veteran, are you talking veteran, or are you talking mainstream, or are you talking Indigenous, or are you talking Black?
I'm talking Indigenous
Okay. veterans.
veterans.
Up here, there's the disrespect, the racism, has been horrible. In the States, not so bad, because we respect our veterans down there. We have Veterans Day. We have all kinds of things where veterans are respected by veterans, well, I don't know what's going to happen now with this newest regime. But I can tell you that when I was coming home and got into a taxi in my uniform, I was going home to see my mom, and the taxi driver threw me out. I was leaving, I guess it's Kennedy Airport or whatever it's called now. He threw me out of the taxi because I was a baby-killing whore. So that was civilians. So during my unwar war, yes, I see you. You hate me with that thing.
He hates all of us with that.
Man, I'll tell you. But we'll have coffee. How's that?
Okay, because I
Thank
do have a
you.
couple questions.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Gibbs, you understand my job, eh? I have to, so sorry, but you can still... No. No, it's not true. He's a friend of mine, so no, it's not true, no. Well, seriously, I have my fellow MP, Sean Casey, for 6 minutes, please. Mr. Casey, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to our witnesses for being here, and for those who have served, thank you for your service. I'd like to start with Dr. Held and Mr. Hook. You had referred in your earlier testimony to some work that you're doing along with the Five Eyes partners. And I understand that there is a formal relationship between CIMVR and a health research branch of the Five Eyes. I just wonder if you could expand on that a little more in terms of the work that's being done in collaboration with our international partners.
I can start there. So one of the things that we do, and I'll talk about two pieces, one that relates to the demographics we're talking about today with Indigenous veterans. But in relation to the Five Eyes partners, which just for everyone's information, Five Eyes is the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, just so we're aware of all the countries involved. We do a mental health research innovation collaboration that's focused, it's thought leadership from leading experts in the Five Eyes, and not generating any new research, but synthesizing some of the most important topics that are there and writing commentaries and providing strategic direction. Another one that we spoke about in our opening remarks was for Indigenous veterans or Indigenous service members within Canada. Our hope is to help provide a bit of a strategic framework around research that needs to be done within Canada, recognizing that there's a gap and recognizing that us as one institute shouldn't be the one solely setting research for military veteran or Indigenous veterans. So we are looking to work with Indigenous organizations across Canada to make sure that the questions that are being asked are appropriate, that are needed, and can start driving research the way it needs to go from everybody's perspectives.
Ms. Gage, you indicated that you're the founder of National Aboriginal Veterans Day. Can you tell us a bit about how that came to pass and how it has evolved?
Well, in 1991, a group of Indigenous veterans had gone to the November 11th ceremonies to lay a wreath, and they were refused. They were told that, you know, you're not welcome. You can do it after everybody leaves. So I believe it was the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples that got some funding and decided that they were going to rectify the whole situation. I was working at the St. Norbert Foundation. This gentleman came in with two elders and said, "Would you do some typing for me?" And I said, "Sure." I helped him pull together their constitution bylaws. And the next thing I know, I had been elected as their new secretary-treasurer of the Manitoba Aboriginal Veterans Association. And that meant that in August, I think it was August 22nd, we came here to Ottawa for the national meeting. And I ended up being nominated as the lady in the pink sweater as vice president of the National Aboriginal Veterans Association. They didn't even know my name. And so at the end of the
I bet
the
they do now.
Oh, yeah. And you haven't heard the end of me. At the end of the meeting, well, throughout the whole meeting, it kept coming up that we need a day. And June 21st, they was like, no, because we'll just be another line on the program. And so, stupid me, I said, well, what about November 8th? Because if you take the 8 and turn it on its side, it's the infinity symbol for the Métis people. And a lot of traditional people know that there's well, you know the number 7 is quite important to First Nations people. The reason is because there's 4 levels above and 4 levels below that meet on the surface as a 7. So they said the great idea. You know, we'll be able to get our uniforms out and polish our shoes and learn how to march, figure out which left and right, and, you know, do that. And they gave me a mandate to go out and do it. That's what they said. Go get us the day. So as you can tell, I'm very shy. So I was like, how am I going to do this? So I pulled a shenanigan or two, told a little white lie maybe, and I got Mayor Susan Thompson of Winnipeg to declare November 8th, 1993 as Indigenous Recognition and Remembrance Day, I believe is what it was. And there was a gentleman by the name of Eric Robson who was the Minister of Indian and Northern Affairs in Manitoba at that time. And I bugged him for 2 years to do it as a province. And he finally said, you know what, Randy, I will put it on the table. It's going to be voted down. And when it will you shut up and leave me alone? I said, sure. So he tabled it, and it was a unanimous vote to do it. And so in 1993, it started, and it just, I just push things. I just don't take no for an answer, and I'm really expecting next year to have it on the calendar as a national day of recognition instead of just a little sub thing. I know he's doing the thing again, isn't he? So that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. But yeah, it's been a labor of love, and I faced horrible racism, terrible racism. It was unbelievable. When we laid the first wreath at the memorial in 1992, a group of Legion ladies was behind us, and the things they said, luckily Sam was able to control me. I didn't go back and put blood on the memorial. But that has all completely changed around to where the Legion is very, very supportive and very much there for us. So just give me a job. I'll do it for you.
Thank you, Mr. Kissy. And she said that she's shy. Well, well, so now for the last intervention, I'd like to invite Miss Rachel Blaney for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. I'm actually going to start off with Dr. Held and Mr. Hook. I almost said Dr. Hook, and that would have been another thing completely, from CIMVR. But I guess I'm just curious about, I appreciate that you've identified that there's a gap in research, and I think that's an important first step. And I'm just wondering, as you're moving towards having more research, who decides that, and what is your internal process to make sure that what you're researching is important to those people that actually are from those communities?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's something that we just worked through in a proposal that we put forward for a grant to run this. So we invited individuals from the Inuit communities, Métis, First Nations from across Canada, Indigenous organizations, to come forward in a roundtable. It would be 3 roundtable discussions to start to speak to some of the priorities. We've been involved in some research to date with other organizations where we were just asking the wrong questions. It wasn't ill-intentioned, but when we ask these questions from our perspectives and we bring them to Indigenous communities, we realize that it's not important to them or it's the wrong questions. So we recognize at Simver that it's not appropriate for us to ask those questions no matter how well-intentioned we are. So our internal process right now, we have no government funding for research, which I think is an important distinction. So we are looking for funding in order to complete that process and make sure all groups are represented, and we can start talking about some key themes, because it's also recognizing we say Indigenous veterans, and it's not, and of course there'd be other people who could answer this better than me, but there's priorities of each individual Indigenous organization is going to be different. Each Indigenous veteran is going to be different. So at a higher level, understanding some of the questions that we can be asking to make sure that the research is what's needed.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate your awareness of the difference between intention and impact, and that figuring out how to maneuver that can sometimes be really challenging. So my next question will be for Ms. Jocko. I'll start with you and then follow up with you, Ms. Gage. Same question. And first of all, I just want to say, Ms. Jocko, I'm so sorry for the loss of your son, and I thank you for sharing that with us, and I will carry that with me. I guess my question, I heard a couple of things that I think are really important in testimony, things about traditional ceremony and also addressing the needs of isolated communities, especially Indigenous communities around veteran services. I know what a challenge that can be. I've seen that. One of the witnesses that has testified here talked about having an annual event where Indigenous veterans were brought together to talk about all of the issues that they were facing and experiencing, to better educate veteran affairs to the realities on the ground for people, for Indigenous people, and to sort of create a place where there could be ceremony or different actions depending on the people that came together. And based on other testimony, I think that's probably a very good idea to actually hear from the community itself and all the diversity within that community. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts you'd like to share on that, and then I'll leave it to you, Ms. Gage. So Ms. Jocko, if I could have you start.
Yeah, no, I think, and I have heard that myself, but, I guess the concern for me when we say Indigenous, to make sure you are including First Nation, Inuit, Métis, and non-status Indians, because there are still, unbeknownst to you and probably the country, there are still a lot of non-status Indians out there that deserve to be, part of the conversation. And I know that the military, went around in days gone by when I was in asking who was Indigenous and who was not. And so where does a non-status person come into the equation? And the reason I say that, and you can look it up, the Michelle Band, and I know people from the Michelle Band, the entire band was enfranchised, not just veterans or people that, had the nerve to be educated like the old days, you were enfranchised, but the entire band was enfranchised. And so they're fighting for their rights, and some of them are veterans. So, just to make sure that it is inclusive, and because there's a big problem with accepting people, you're not, like my mom's from Scotland, just so but I guess the protection I have is I live here on the reserve. But if people don't know your, like your outward appearance, and you say you're Indigenous and they don't believe you, how people need to be, taken at face value and to be treated with respect and dignity, and just as long as you're taking that into consideration, I think that that's a positive thing.
I think that's so helpful. Thank you for that. And I mean, we can talk about our opinions about that, but I think Indigenous communities get to make that decision, and that it's held by the Indian Act is not necessarily good. Ms. Gage.
Ceremonies are very important. They're hugely, hugely important. And it depends on who you're talking to, whether you're talking to First Nations, and like she says, First Nations, there's treaty, non-treaty status, non-status, it gets very, very confusing. But being able to have access to an elder or have access to a medicine person, or just, when you live in the city, simply hear a drum. It's amazing when you hear a good, honest, clean drum, what that does to you. It's sort of like, whoa, okay, I'm not dead yet. I'm real, blood's pumping, because that's the heartbeat of our Mother, the Earth. So having that connection and things like that. And one of the things that I have experienced by the work that I do with veterans is that a lot of the programming that happens, I'll tell you, there was a husband and wife, there still are a husband and wife in Manitoba, served together, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. They've been through the mud and the blood and the beer. They've been there. And they wanted to go to a counseling program, so they sent them to Deer Lodge. And when they got to Deer Lodge, she had to sit in the hallway because she couldn't be in there listening to what the men were saying. And when they walked in there to begin with, now these are people that have had no disrespect to any religion around here, people. This is just truth. When they walked in and were sitting there, the person that walked in to do the counseling and help them debrief was wearing a turban. And how many years had they just spent with those in their crosshairs? Does no one ever think about that? For me, the first time I seen a Vietnamese person walking into my apartment block, I was like, what the hell's going on here? You have to think of these things. It's a simple thing, but you have to think about it. So if we have access to our traditions and our culture and being able to go to an elder, go to a sweat lodge, go to a sun dance, whatever it is, be it First Nation Métis, go to a square dance. We need to have that. We need to be able to have that for our community, for our guys and girls to heal.
Mrs. Gage, I'm afraid to show you my red card, but I have to. So thank you very much. And like we said, thank you for your service, to serve in the Army. Et je voudrais terminer.
And in ending, on behalf of the members of the committee and myself, our clerk, and our staff and technical team, we'd like to thank you. We'd like to especially thank Randy Gage, Manitoba Chapter, Chair of Unified Veterans of Manitoba, and on Zoom, Wendy Ann Joko, Indigenous Liaison Innovation 7, and from the Canadian Institute of Military and Veteran Health Research, Nicholas Held, Assistant Scientific Director, accompanied by Paul Hook, Major, retired, Managing Director. We'd like to thank you for your participation, and if you have any documents you would like to share with us, please send these to our clerk. And I would like to suggest to the members we adjourn. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.